This class is on pronouns, and we're going to be addressing two types of pronouns, personal and relative pronouns. So a pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun or another substantive. Now that's a grammatical word to refer to the many things that can act as nouns within a sentence, like a participle or an adjective or an infinitive. Pronouns, again, replace these things or take the place of them. Here's an example down here. I see the disciple and I teach him. In this sentence, the noun disciple is replaced by this pronoun him in the second part of the clause. We could repeat the disciple, I see the disciple and I teach the disciple, but that would be repetitive, and it's more compact to use a pronoun that takes the place of disciple and refers back to that word. Okay, I want to define the word antecedent. We talked about pronoun, but antecedent is an important word to know. So the noun that the pronoun replaces is called the antecedent, and we'll use that term a lot when we're talking about Greek pronouns. What's the antecedent here? Because that's very important for defining things like meaning and understanding what's going on. So using that example that I used on the previous slide, I see the disciple and I teach him. The noun here, disciple, is the antecedent, okay? So him replaces this noun, this antecedent, but also it's referring back to it. We logically go, oh, he's teaching him. The him is the disciple. So this is an important definition. So remember, antecedent is the word that the pronoun, the noun or the substantive that the pronoun is replacing. Greek pronouns act like English pronouns. But Greek pronouns, like nouns, have case, number, and gender. And a Greek pronoun will agree with its antecedent in number and gender. But the case of the pronoun reflects its grammatical function within the sentence or clause that it's in. This presentation will introduce two types of pronouns. Personal pronoun, in English, I, we, you, he, she, it, and they. And then relative pronouns, who, which, or that. First, we'll deal with personal pronouns. Personal pronouns have three persons. First person, I, ego, we, hemes. Second person, you, singular and plural. So su, singular, and humes, plural. And finally, third person, he, she, it, or they. So autos, aute, and auta. There's also a plural form of this, which I didn't put on the slide, that we'll see later on. Okay, this is the paradigm for the first person personal pronoun. So I, we, etc., etc. That's the first person personal pronoun. So ego, mu, moi, me, hemes, hemon, hemen, and hemas. I got the translation over here. So these are the singular forms, and these are the plural forms, okay? I put them all together here for you. And these guys in the brackets are the emphatic forms. And the emphatic forms are used generally after prepositions and for emphasis. or stress or contrast. So those are the emphatic forms. You see, the only difference is between mu and amu is the addition of this epsilon at the front. So the same function, case function, is true in pronouns that we saw in nouns. So ego is the subject, mu is the genitive, and it's showing possession here, my. Dative, moi, is showing indirect object. And me, or me, is accusative, and it's showing direct object. Okay? And there's similarities, right? Mu, you see omicron upsilon with the genitive. The iota is pretty standard for the dative. So we see that in all the dative forms. And the plural forms, genitive plural, omega, nu, is the marker for the genitive plural. So you must learn this paradigm and learn the forms of the first person personal pronoun. These are essential for you to know. Okay? Here's an example. This is an I am saying from John 14. Ego eimi he hodos kai he aletheia kai he zoe. I am. The stress is on the I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay, this is the paradigm for the second person personal pronouns. So you, both singular and plural. Okay. Su, soy, se, humes, humon, humin, humas. And it's you. Okay, and again, the same relations between the case and its function within the sentence. So subject, possession, indirect object, and direct object. And so again, the singular forms are here, the plural forms are here. And again, we see some similarities between what we've learned about nouns, the omicron upsilon for the genitive, the iota for the dative, and then the omega nu for the genitive plural. So you need to learn those. And again, these guys in brackets are the emphatic forms. And the only difference here is that there's an accent on the final vowel here. That's what you're seeing. That's the emphatic forms. And they're for extra emphasis. Now you will notice that the plural forms of the first and the second personal pronouns are quite similar. So he, mes, and who mes. Easily mixed up. I mix them up all the time. So what's the solution? Remember that you is you. That's how I make the distinction. Whenever I see that upsilon, I think of you, and you means you. So that's a good way. And again, you need to learn this paradigm so that you recognize these personal pronouns. Here's an example. Su e ha wios mu ha agapetos en soy udokesa. And there you have two forms of the second person. Su, subject, soy, and here it's with the preposition en. That's why it's dative. And this is nominative, so it's the subject. You are my beloved son. In you I am well pleased. Here's another example. En akene te hemera ginos esta humes hoti ego en to patrimu kai humes en emoi kego en humin. Okay, we've got a mixture here of first and second personal pronouns. On that day, you will know So the humes is there for emphasis. You will know that ego, I am in my Father. So there's the genitive of the first personal pronoun, and you are in me. Okay, you are in me. This is a combination, a crasis, kai plus ego, which creates kegel, and I am in you. Okay? So we've got some nominatives, and we've got some datives here. There's another nominative, but we've also got some first person examples. Moi, ego moi, and e moi. There's an emphatic form because it's being used with this preposition here. And finally, here's the paradigm for the third person personal pronoun. So he or she or it, and in the plural, they. And the nice thing about this paradigm is that it's exactly like the noun paradigms that you've learned already. So think logos, what's the word? So agape and ada and ergon. Now the only difference here is that the nominative and the accusative singular forms lack the nu that you always see with the neuter forms. And these little numbers on the side tell you that they follow the declension pattern. So the masculine forms follow the declension pattern of second declension masculine nouns. The feminine forms follow the pattern of first declension feminine forms, and the neuter follow the pattern of second declension neuter forms, except with this one exception. But you can see, and I really don't need to repeat it. You take a look at it. You don't need to learn it because you know these endings already from your work with nouns. And note this one exception, though, with the neuter forms and the lack of the nu on the nominative and accusative form, and you'll be good to go. So those are the third person personal pronouns. Easy peasy. Here's some examples. Kai uthus e kalesen autois, kai afentes ton pateron auton. Okay, so you have, and immediately he called them, and leaving their father, and the clause goes on, they followed him. So you have autus, which is accusative plural. It's the direct object of that verb, and afentes is a participle, which we'll learn about. Here you have patera is a accusative, and it's the direct object of that participle, and auton is a genitive, so it's their father. They left their father. Here's another example. Kai erkatai he meter autu, kai hoi adelphoi autu, kai exo stekontes apestelan pros auton. And they came, erkatai. The mother, his mother, and his brothers. So autu, so Jesus' mother and brothers. Autu, genitive, and outside they were standing, and they sent, apostellan, someone to him. So you get the preposition plus an accusative. So pros plus the accusative, to him. So you have a genitive and accusative here. Genitives showing relationship, accusatives the direct object of the preposition. Now when we use personal pronouns, they have three possible ways of being used. Because remember back, when you're dealing with verbs, they have personal endings. And those personal endings tell you person and number. So do you really need pronouns? Not really, because the information about the subject is contained within the verb. So they will use pronouns maybe to clarify who's doing the action or who's involved. They'll be there for emphasis. There's something called the intensive use, which is for autos only, and the identical use, which is for autos only. So let me go through all these different uses for the personal pronoun. First, I want to talk about the emphatic use, and it's used when a pronoun is not required, and it's used for clarity, as I said, stylistic variation, or making the subject more emphatic. Here's an example from Mark 1, verse 8. Ego baptisa humas hudati, autos de baptise humas en pneumati hagio. So I, not needed, because we know it's a first person singular. I baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. So there's a contrast here, and there's an emphasis. John is saying, I performed this kind of baptism, but he, that is Jesus, will perform a different ministry of baptism. So that's why these personal pronouns are used in this sentence for emphasis. There's something called the intensive use, and that's primarily used with the third person pronoun autos. So autos can be used with the nominative case noun to mean myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself, or themselves. And autos agrees with the noun in case, gender, number. Here's an example from Romans 8. Auto ta pneuma su marture to pneumati hemon hoti esmen techna theu. The Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God. Okay, Spirit Himself. So that auto, pneuma is neuter, nominative, singular, as is auto. Now we translated himself because grammatically pneuma is neuter, but conceptually, theologically, the Spirit is a person, so we assign a personal gendered noun to the Spirit. The Spirit Himself bears witness, okay, Himself. So that's the intensive use of autos. But there's also the identical use of autos. So autos can be used with a noun to mean the same, the word same. And autos, in this case, agrees with the noun in case, gender, and number, and it is always preceded by an article. That's how you tell the difference, really, between the previous use, intensive use, and the identical use. So this is a passage from 1 Corinthians 12. Diaresis de charismaton eisen, ta de auta pneuma. There are varieties now. There are varieties of spiritual gifts, charismata, but the same Spirit, the same Spirit. So there, Paul is arguing that there are varieties of gifts, but they all come from the same Holy Spirit. So there's diversity, but unity. That's kind of what he's getting at in that chapter, that there's a diversity of giftedness, but they all have this common source in the Holy Spirit. That's the identical use of autos. I want to move on now and talk about the relative pronoun. The relative pronoun relates a clause to someone or something previously mentioned before, i.e., the antecedent. So this little diagram above kind of shows you what a relative pronoun is. That who is the relative pronoun. The boy is the antecedent. So the boy who stole the bike is at the door. Okay, so this relative pronoun links this back to the noun, the boy. It adds us some information about the boy who's standing at the door. That's what a relative pronoun does in English and also in Greek. So relative pronoun, they do not introduce questions. So we use, for instance, who, or whom, or whose, or which. These words can be used in questions, but in Greek there's a different type of pronoun that introduces questions. These refer to an antecedent and refer and add more information about it. That's the whole point of a relative pronoun. Relative pronouns introduce a clause that gives more information about a noun. And in English, we use these terms, who, whom, or whose, or which, or that, to introduce these relative clauses. Another definition is, again, we have the relative pronoun who, but the whole clause that is linked to that relative pronoun is called the relative clause. So here's the paradigm of the relative pronoun. And again, think logos, agape, and ergon. And it's the same pattern. Second declension masculine, first declension feminine, second declension neuter. Again, noting with the neuter form, the nu is not there. But basically think of the endings that you place on the nouns and you'll have the relative pronoun memorized, noting the rough breathing and the accent above each form. Okay? That's what marks these relative pronouns apart from other forms that look like them. So again, the relative pronoun is easy peasy to memorize. Just think of the noun endings. And in fact, if you go through them again, you'll basically be reinforcing the endings that you've learned already. Logos, logu, logo, logon, logoi, logon, logois, logus. Knock off that noun stem and you've got the paradigm for the relative pronoun. So that's easy to memorize and to work with. I want to talk a little bit about the relative pronoun and the relationship to its antecedent. So again, relative pronouns, as we saw above, have case, number, and gender. And the relative pronoun is linked to an antecedent. And the relative pronoun must agree with its antecedent in gender and number. It must reflect that antecedent. But again, its grammatical function determines its case within the clause that it's in. So while it may be, for instance, nominative plural, if its antecedent is nominative plural, it might be accusative if it's acting a certain way in a clause, as opposed to, say, maybe the antecedent is a nominative, depending on what clause, what's happening in the clause that it's in. Here's an example from John 1, verse 9. Ein ta phos ta alethanon, ha photidze panta anthropon, erkomenon eis ton cosmon. Okay, so this guy is emi in the third singular imperfect. So the true light was the true light which gives light to all humanity, was coming into the world. Okay, so you could also in that situation say that, the true light that enlightens all humanity. However you want to translate that ha. So that ha there refers back to phos. So it is neuter, singular, and in this case, the which enlightens, this relative pronoun is acting as a subject of this verb enlighten. So it's happens to be nominative. Taphos, the true light, it's also nominative because it's acting as the subject of this complete clause here. So in that case, they both agree, but again, ha photidze is the clause, the relative clause, and it's acting as the subject of that verb. So that's why it's considered a nominative. Let's look at the second example. Kai idu ha aster han edon en te anatole pro egen autois. And behold, ha aster, the star which they saw in the east, went ahead of them. Okay, so this star, this is referring back to the star. The star here is masculine, nominative, singular. This relative pronoun is masculine, it's singular, but it's accusative because it is acting as the direct object of the verb. So see there, the case and the gender are the same, but the case use is different. I mean, the gender and the number is the same, but the case use is different because it's acting as the direct object of this verb. All right? The star which they saw in the east went ahead of them. And this is showing you kind of sometimes how we need to make minor adjustments in how we translate. So this is Rembrandt's painting of the Apostle Paul writing at his desk, and this is a wonderful verse from Philippians 4:9. Ha kai e matheta kai paralabeta kai e kusata kai eden en emoi. Edeta en emoi tauta praseta. There's your relative pronoun. And the things, or what, literally the things which, what we translate, what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, do these things. Okay? So this relative pronoun is kind of standing on its own. It's summarizing all that the Philippians have observed and learned and received from the Apostle Paul. So all the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, these things you need to do. And here's an example from the Gospels. Whenever Jesus tells a story or a parable or a saying, he will say, Hos eke hota, ota, akuen aku eto. Okay, this is an infinitive. This is an imperative. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Okay, whoever. Okay, so we need to go whoever to make sense, even though this just means relative pronoun who. Whoever has ears to hear, or another translation goes, let anyone with ears to hear listen. That's another good translation, but literally, who has ears to hear? That's what it means. Here's another example. Ti de me kaleta kuri kai u poeta Ha lego. That's a question. So Jesus is confronting people and he's saying, why do you call me, and this is a vocative, Lord, Lord, and you do not do what I say to you, or the things that I say to you. So again, this is a neuter, it's accusative, and it's plural. Okay. The things that or what I tell you. Here's another example where the relative pronoun is just standing on its own here. Hagar uk estin kathemon huper hemon estin. For whoever is not against us is for us. And finally, Paul's famous words in 1 Corinthians 15. Kariti de theu emi ha emi. What a wonderful expression here. Kariti, by the grace of God. So this is a dative. By the grace of God, I am what I am. He uses a neuter here, a neuter nominative singular, and I always wondered why he did this. I am what I am. It's not, he didn't use who, he didn't go has, which was masculine. He didn't go who I am. He said what I am. I am what I am. Maybe encompassing all of his life experience, everything that went in to making Paul what I am. His experience, the experience of coming to faith, of being forgiven. By the grace of God, I am what I am. Humbly saying that all that encompasses him is by the grace of God. All right, that's it for relative pronouns. So in this class, I've gone over personal pronouns and relative pronouns, two types of pronouns, and we'll be learning about more pronouns much later in Greek Part 2. So until next time, keep studying Greek.